What is up guys, Andy, Forest Team Runner here, back with another video for you today. And today I want to be talking about training plans and how you can make your training plan successful. Disclaimer, I'm not a coach and I'm not going to be giving you any advice because that's not my forte. What I want to be doing today is giving you some tips, because you know what guys, the internet is a wonderful place and it's a dangerous place, and suddenly everyone is an expert in their field. And there's so much information and knowledge out there on this subject that a lot of us are finding that we're building our own plans. Now, I'm exempt from this because I've always had plans that I've either paid a coach for or I now have a coach, but I know a lot of you guys do make your own plans, and so I want to give you my tips, having gone through a number of plans that are going to help you build a successful training plan. So without further ado, let's jump into tip number one. Okay guys, so tip number one is going to be progression. Now this is something that I see in a lot of people that write their own training plans that is a bit of a downfall on their part. Progression means mileage progression, it means session progression, it means general all-round progression. So for example, if you have penciled in your session, if you've written your own plan and then you want to be going out every week doing 1k repeats, 5k time trial, whatever it might be, whether it's a park run or whatever, and that you are classing as your tempo session or your threshold session, what you have to remember is in your head you're going to be trying to go quicker on those sessions or trying to maintain that effort. Now let's use park run because that's a great example. A lot of people use park run as their tempo run. So let's say you get your park run time down from 30 minutes to 28 minutes to 27 minutes to 26 minutes across the duration of the plan. Well done, you've got yourself a PB. What you haven't thought about is actually if you're using that as your threshold session, you are spending less time in the threshold zone week on week. So where you're meant to be progressing, you're actually regressing, because although you're getting quicker at running the 5k, that whole idea of that running at that intensity is failing you because you're running for less time in that zone. So actually it's no benefit whatsoever. So progression, you need to incorporate sessions that are going to progress throughout the week, starting off with sort of 400 meter repeats, 800 meter repeats, 1000 meter repeats, up to mile repeats, 2 mile repeats, depending on what race you're training for. You see that progression. Or if you're doing time, 6 by 2 minutes, then 6 by 3 minutes, and then 6 by 4 minutes. However you might progress it, just as an example, that's what you need to do. So when you are putting your sessions pen to paper, think about how these sessions over the week are going to progress. So that is my number one tip. Tip number two, guys, is periodization. What do I mean by periodization? Some of you might have heard that word bandied around, some of you might not. What it means is you're going to periodize your training, you're going to break it up into sections. Marathon training is a fantastic example. It's difficult to do periodization on a shorter training plan, but let's say you've got 12 to 18 weeks, you're going to break that up into 2 or 3 chunks. Now, whichever way round you wish to do it is completely up to you, but in the beginning you might start off with shorter, sharper reps, and then you might move up to longer reps later in the plan. And so that shorter, sharper work at the beginning is going to be your first period of training where you're going to be working on that top end speed. Then you're going to break it down and start to work more on the speed endurance, where you're going to be doing longer repeats such as kilometer repeats, mile repeats, 2 mile repeats, and you're going to break your plan up into sections based on the level of intervals that you're doing. Now, what I must stress to you is there are many ways of doing this. In fact, I was having a chat with Doug the other day, on my coach, on the phone about this. Some coaches recommend you do the shorter stuff first and the more race specific stuff at the end. Some recommend doing it the other way round. Whatever way you wish to do it, because that's a personal preference, just remember to periodize it. There's no point in you going out and doing 400 meter repeats one week and then mile repeats another week, and then back to some maybe 200 meter repeats on week 3, and then chucking some 2 mile repeats on week 4. You're just zigzagging all the way through and it's not going to be any benefit to you. So you need to work on your specific zones at specific times to get the best out of your training. Tip number 3, guys, is to incorporate rest weeks, or how I should call it is low mileage weeks. So you have these sort of weeks where you progress and progress and progress with mileage. Again, let's use an example. You might do a pattern of 3 weeks where you are progressing, and then you might have a regression week from the mileage. So in a 4-week block, 3 weeks are building up, and then 1 week is a bit of a regression, and then the next 3 weeks is a build up, and then another regression. So other people like to do 2 weeks and then a week. I like to do 3. It's something I've done for ages now, and since working with Doug again, he also uses that same methodology, which is fantastic. And so you might want to start off, let's say, at 20 miles a week in your first week, moving up to 25 miles in week 2, and then 30 miles in week 3. But then you might want to jump back down to maybe between 20 and 25 miles, so maybe 22-ish, just as an example, so that you can see the progression. Then you give your body a break. That break allows your body to absorb the training you're doing, gives your body a rest, because those first 3 weeks are going to be intense. They're going to be hard work, and you are going to feel the draining effect in the long term. So it's really important that you give yourself those rest weeks, or let's call them regression weeks in the mileage, and you do that throughout your plan. So, you know, depending on how long your plan is or short it is, you know, for my example, recently I had a 7-week plan. If you guys have been following along with the 10K training series, it was a very, very short plan, but actually it was just to get myself tuned up. So I ended up having 1 regression week in the middle, and then a taper week, and then 2 weeks taper at the end. So I had 3 weeks build, 4th week was regression, and then 5 and 6 were build, and then 7, it actually was an 8-week plan in the end, 7 and 8 were sort of taper. So we structured it on the basis of putting a regression week in to allow me to absorb the training, and I highly recommend you do something like that as well. Tip number 4, guys, if you're building your own training plan, is to build in some races, some tune-up races. There's nothing better than putting up or entering a tune-up race in your plan. Just make sure you do it in the right way. If you are sat there in January going, oh my gosh, I've got a marathon plan, I've got to start it now, and I'm not going to be running my marathon till April, and I've got nothing in the middle, I guarantee you by end of February, beginning of March, you're going to be pulling your hair out, and you're going to be off training and be racing. So what that does is it allows you to break up the training cycle, allows you to put in an effort, allows you to see what your training's doing for you. It's giving you a bit of an indication as to if you're on track for your main goal or not. And that also then allows you to tinker with your training plan after that, in case you're not quite there or you're way over where you expected. For example, again, if you're marathon training, you might want to consider putting a race 6 weeks prior to the marathon. A 20-mile race would be ideal, but if you want to do a half marathon, that's also fine. That allows you to get race sharp, get into race conditions, race preparation. I guarantee you 4 months is a long time to forget how to race. And I know that sounds a stupid thing to say, but we all sort of get race nerves, and the more you do it, the better you become at it. It's about structuring it correctly though. You don't want to chuck in a race 1 or 2 weeks before your goal race. Ultimately as well, you don't want to chuck in a race in the first 2 or 3 weeks and then have nothing for the whole. You want to try and structure them correctly. I will be doing this with my marathon training come January. I will share more details on that with you nearer the time. However, it's something that I recommend you do, again, if you're building your own plan to building some tune-up races. And the final tip, guys, tip number 5, is to keep your training specific. If you're training for a 10K, make sure you're doing shorter, sharper intervals that will replicate that 10K feeling and will allow you to tune up specifically for a 10K ultimately as well. With a marathon, if you're marathon training, make sure you put in the relevant building sections. Like I've just told you before in these last 4 points, relevant building blocks. There's no point for the whole of the marathon plan for you to be doing 200, 400 meter repeats kind of like all the way through. You need to be working on your speed endurance for the longer distance stuff in particular. And as much as speed endurance is important for the shorter, sharper stuff, if you're more training for a 5 and 10K, you're going to be more focusing on those shorter, sharper reps for a longer period of time. Maybe you're in a marathon plan, you're going to be doing it for the first block, the first phase. But then phase 2 and 3, you're going to be working up the intervals in length and distance. So keep it specific. Don't train for something, don't train your intervals. Don't run intervals that are not relevant to what you're doing, or I shouldn't just say intervals because there are all types of sessions. Pick specific sessions for specific races. That is my final tip. So guys, I hope you enjoyed those tips. From my perspective, as I said, I would just be wary about building your own training plan, but I know a lot of people do it, and I think it's important that if I can share anything from the last 3 years of running on training plans, it's to share some kind of knowledge of the things that have helped me progress as a runner. As I said, I have a coach and I highly recommend him. I will leave the link to Doug's channel and business in the description if you're interested in coaching. But if you are in a position where you're just building your own plan, please do consider taking those tips into consideration when you're building that up. So if that is useful to you guys and you have any questions, please do feel free to leave them below. I will answer as many as I can, and if there's any questions above my station, I will get Doug on the case to answer for me, because as I said on this channel, I don't like to practice what I don't preach. It's important that I keep honest and true to what I talk about, and I feel that I have this information here that I can share with you that might help you. So if you enjoy it, guys, please do give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for weekly running content, and I'll see you later. Until next time.